Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team, and I'd like to welcome you to our Pulse webinar. I'm very sorry about the short delay. We had some technical issues, but we're fully here for you now. We have an overview of the latest PKI product and compliance news for you today. A couple of today's topics are a deep dive into Apple's 47-day ballot, Sectigo's acquisition of Entrust public certificate business, Chrome's update to its root policy, and many more. For our session here today, we have Nick France and Tim Callan for you. And as always, this presentation is being recorded and we will share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. Finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the chat function and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. And with that, Tim and Nick, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Leah.
Thank you, Leah.
Afternoon, Tim.
Morning, Nick. Afternoon, Nick. So
Yes.
Here's what we have on the agenda for today. We want to talk about the 47-day TLS ballot, which is referred to as SC068, in case you care. What is going on with that? This is obviously a topic that's very interesting to many people. Another topic that we've gotten a lot of inquiry about is our acquisition of the Entrust public certificate business. We've done separate webinars just on this and invited a lot of people to those, so those are available to watch, but also Nick and I will give you the overview today. The updates in post-quantum cryptography, which has been heating up quite a bit in terms of the attention it's getting and how much people care, so we'll get into that. Chrome did a recent update to its root policy that we'll give you the skinny on, and there are updates to DCV that we probably all should care about. So why don't we start with 47-day ballot? So we've been over this, I think, before. This latest chapter in the shortening certificates trend started in 2023 when Google kind of threw out a challenge to say we want to see certificates get down to 90 days. And that led to a lot of conversation about when and how and what mechanism that would move that forward. And last year in the fall, Apple picked up the baton on this with a proposed ballot that would step down over the course of several years the maximum term of SSL certificates to 47 days. So it would go in multiple steps. Now, this ballot has been modified, I think, 3 times since it was originally proposed in October. And we can give you the most current version of what it looks like right now. So it's a step down, as we said, and I've got the dates on the left here and what this means in terms of the 2 things that are being reduced is the maximum term for a public TLS certificate. Let's specify this as a public TLS certificate, not FMIME, not code signing, and the maximum domain control validation reuse period, which is how long a CA can continue to issue certs against the same domain to the same subscriber before they must go back and redo DCV. And at present, the maximum for both of these things is 398 days. And as of these dates, what we will see is it will step down in these ways according to the current ballot. So March 15 of 2026, the maximum certificate term goes down to 200 days, which we can think of as 6 months. 200 days, think of 200 days as 6 months plus a little bit, right? That's a good way to think about it. So the idea is they want you on a 6-month cadence. DCV reuse period matches that. A year later, exactly a year later, according to the current draft of the ballot, it would go down to 100 days. Think of that as a quarter, 3 months plus a little bit. Right? So now they're imagining you doing something every 3 months. Runs for 100 days. DCV reuse period once again matches it, goes down to 100 days. And then at this point in the current version of the ballot, 2 years will pass where we will run at that cadence. And then at the end of those 2 years, exactly 2 years later, on March 15, 2029, the maximum certificate validity goes down to 47 days. So think of that as a month plus a little bit. And now they're imagining that we're on a monthly cadence. And at the same time, on the same day, the DCV reuse period will drop down to 10 days. And this is the end state according to the current ballot. Nick, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's a great summary as usual, Tim. And as you said, we've kind of talked about this many times on previous areas, and certainly the webinar before. I think the important things to kind of take away with the current ballot is there is quite a lot of active discussion on it, not just with the CAs and the browsers, but there's also some third parties and external individuals having some comments and things to put in there. But I think it's a good sign that we now have this ballot. We now have what seems to be a reasonable time frame with this, as you say, extended step down to 47 days at the end. And I think you and I are in agreement, Tim, in that we hope this is something that will pass when it goes to vote fairly soon, and that at least that gives everybody, browsers, CAs, and every single one of our customers and subscribers a time frame to work to, which is ultimately what we need. The uncertainty is probably worse than having an actual timeline defined, and this gives us all the benefits that would be provided by short lifetime certs, whilst also being fairly reasonable in terms of the step down dates. So yeah, I think it's a great compromise for everybody, and let's hope it passes.
And just to emphasize what you just said, this of course is the current draft. This has not been to vote. It's not in voting right now, and it is possible that this draft is not the draft that goes to vote, right? But that's what we have right now. So we're giving you up to the minute currency, and if this changes again before there's a vote, and the thing that's voted on is different than this, I think it'll be different in relatively subtle ways, but I think it's possible that there's still more changes coming before this goes to vote. We'll just have to wait and see on this one. This is, I guess probably the point to be made here is that as the certificate lifespans are shortening, more and more people are going to look into automation options. And that's actually one of the things that the browsers view as a positive in order to make this happen. And so what does this mean for you? I think we want, we propose that you think about it this way. So first of all, awareness. I think awareness has gone a long way. It feels to me like a lot of people know at this point about this initiative and that it's potentially coming and what it may mean for us. We recommend that really starting now. Like I've talked to some people who are, unconvinced for sure that something of this form is going to happen. And I am quite convinced that one way or another, we are going to see certificate lifespans that are radically lower than they are today. Yep. And so what we're recommending to people is you really need to start accepting this as a future that is coming, and you need to build your plan for it, right? You need to figure out, how am I going to handle, and maybe 6-month certs you feel like you can handle manually if that's how you're doing it now. But do you feel that way about 3-month certs? Do you feel that way about 1-month certs? And the good news is these things are years off. So there absolutely is an opportunity to plan for it and build your plans and figure out how you're going to do it. But you should do it, right? And we should start doing that. And, so we suggest things like figure out where your certs are, figure out how to automate. Some of it will be easy. Maybe some of it isn't. You've got some time to solve the stuff that isn't, but if you sit around for 2 years and do nothing, then it's going to be kind of a problem, right? So this is, I think this is something that we're just strongly recommending, is take this seriously and start working on what's your plan now so that things can be automated when they have to be. Right, Nick?
I absolutely think that's the right point, Tim, is that we've talked about this a lot before in various places, but I think this is now starting to become an actual reality. I think you and I have agreed for a long time, as we've been very clear about, we see this happening no matter what. But with this ballot coming down with a proposed timeline, we can now see people actually starting to take it seriously. They can see what the timelines are like. And we know that is something that people need to plan for. We know there are some subscribers who will be absolutely able to do this, or indeed do short lifetime certs today. But we also know there's a lot of enterprises and subscribers and ecosystems where it is a challenge. And what we really want to say here, and you and I are not like trying to sell anything here, Tim, but this is just a general point for everybody, is be ready, be prepared. You do need to start looking at your certificate estate. You do need to start preparing for using things like Acme and everything else we've talked about. One of the key things I've often said on these, Tim, is we need to think about the DCV lifetime. As you coming down to 10 days. It's not just certificates getting shorter. So people need to start looking, where are my domains? Where's my DNS? Can I do integration and automation with my DNS provider? The trick is starting now, because 2029 isn't really all that far away for something that is a sizable infrastructure shift, for something that you can't do without as well. I mean, you can't just go, well, I'm going to use TLS, I'm not going to use certificates anymore. Pretty much everyone has to. And so being prepared for this is something to start now. And hopefully these this ballot and these timelines will give the people that need to a good nudge in the right direction to start things moving.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nick. Like, there's a lot of focus on the certificate term and how often certificates will be renewed. But this DCV, let's not overlook the DCV step down, right? 10 days means pragmatically for a lot of organizations that every time you get a new cert, you'll redo DCV. And certainly it means that if you've got something on a monthly cycle, you'll be doing DCV every time. So you now have to start thinking about, like you said, automated ways that DCV can be done, and can be done, instantly and error-free in volume every time. And so again, there's time. Like you have years to get this in place, but get this in place. All right.
Yep, it's time. The time is now. Time is now.
The time is now. All right. So shall we move on to Sectigo's acquisition of the Entrust public certificate business?
Yep, let's talk about it.
So Sectigo announced, at this point, maybe a little over a month ago, that as part of the whole giant Entrust public CA deprecation story that has been going on now for a long time, that Sectigo acquired that business from Entrust. So, we are meeting the customer contracts that customers with Entrust have. They can come over to Sectigo and we will issue the certificates. We are making our SCM platform available to them. And at the same time, Entrust ECS platform is working, and you can order Sectigo certs directly out of it. And we are fulfilling those certificates as well. We are the CA, and as such, we are doing all validation around these certificates, along with issuance and maintenance and revocation checking and all the rest. We are the CA in every way. So part of what this means is, if you're an Entrust customer, if you were validated by Entrust, you will be revalidated by us, right? So we just talked about DCV reuse periods, right? If you just did DCV with Entrust in January or in November 10, then you're still going to redo that when you get your first cert from Sectigo, because we're now a separate CA and we all do all those things separately for ourselves. We are very committed to this space. Where one of the world's largest, one of the world's oldest, and one of the world's largest CAs, and we have focused intensely in making sure that we are, a best of breed, reliable, compliant, forward-thinking, leading the industry in the right direction. It's good for our subscribers and the web PKI. And we are very on top of very important industry trends like shortened certificate lifespan, like DCV changes, like PQC, all of the things we're talking about today that are going to be essential to you as a subscriber. And we want to, link arms with you and walk you through that to make sure all of that is done correctly. In terms of Entrust customers themselves coming over to us, we're very focused on this being a seamless transition. So like I said, you can order your certificates directly in the platform you already use. And you will be for some period of time, not indefinitely, of course, but for some period of time, you will be able to. We're making SCM available today. We're focused on very, let's say, easy, low effort transitions, ports over from the old platform to the new platform. All of this is in place to try to make this just a business as usual, up and running business continuity kind of situation for every Entrust customer. Do you want to add to that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the perfect description there, Tim. I think the one thing I do want to add, though, because it's come up in a few times, we've discussed this with kind of former Entrust customers, but also in some public forums as well. I know I've had to chime in onto some community discussions. What we acquired here as Sectigo was the customers and the customer contracts, right? So we are helping out these customers. We're going to help migrate them over. We're going to take them over. And as you said, everything in terms of issuance and validation. What we've not done is taken over infrastructure, the staff, the company, the routes and the keys and the CAs and all the things like that. So it's just important to know that there is a distinction there, and that unlike previous times when this has happened, this was really kind of a transition of the customers, so we could help them out and get them set up on a different platform and a different CA and avoid all the problems of the Entrust distrust. So I'm sure if anybody's listening and they've got any questions, there's been countless other communications from us and from Entrust as well. And if there's any specific questions, Tim and I are happy to try and answer them. But also there's a fleet of sales and account management people who are probably better placed to assist than we will. But hopefully that's explained everything that's happened. It would be remiss if we didn't talk about it.
Yeah, and we're trying real hard. We're trying real hard to talk to Entrust customers about this. So if somehow you're on this and you have not had a chance to discuss this, just call us. We'll happily talk to you about it, because we've been actively reaching out to everybody. All right, updates in post-quantum cryptography. So here's where we stand in terms of these are approved, NIST-approved PQC algorithms, okay? So there's one key exchange module. That's what we used to call Crystal's Kyber. It's now called MLChem. That has been released as a FIPS standard. It's FIPS 203. But just a few weeks ago, NIST announced a backup KEM. In the event that hypothetically it turns out that lattice-based techniques aren't as solid as everybody thinks, and as more mathematicians are poking at it, it turns out that people can break them. So this is something called HQC, was its name as a candidate. It doesn't have an official name yet. It doesn't have a FIPS standard yet. It's down at the bottom, but you can think of HQC as our parachute in case Crystal's Kyber, aka MLChem, crashes. Right? That's the other basket for eggs to be in. And that's just been announced by NIST. We're still going to need a FIPS standard. We're going to still need all that stuff. But that's the algorithm they've settled on, and that's going to come. There are 3 signing algorithms that have been approved. Crystal's Dilithium, Sphinx, Falcon. They now have new names: MLDSA, SLHDSA, FNDSA. DSA stands for Digital Signature Algorithm. There you are. Those all have FIPS standards: 204, 205, 206, and 206 is not released yet, but that's what it will be. And the main one we're expecting to use is Crystal's Dilithium most of the time. So MLDSA, FIPS 204, MLChem, FIPS 203, these are the standards that are going to be the workhorses for data in transit for things like TLS. And then the other ones will be available in other specific spots. So these are out, these are current. So what happens now? The first thing is now it goes to IETF. So now that NIST has released these specifications, these are sitting in IETF, where IETF is working out how does this translate to real specific requirements around protocols and certificate formation and things along those lines. That is being worked on now. we had a guest on the Root Causes podcast right near the end of the year who is the chairman of the SIG that works on that in IETF. And we asked her, when do you think this will be done? And she said, if I had to guess, I would guess it'll be done right around the end of the year. She meant 2025. So we're looking hopefully to get something out of IETF around the end of this year. Once that's out, then two things need to happen. One is that CA Browser Forum will then take this and build it into our own standards. I don't think it will take a super long time because we'll be tracking what the IETF is doing in real time. And then the second thing is that technology vendors will need to work on support, right? Because the fact that there's a standard doesn't work if your software doesn't work with it. So you'll have two kind of things going in parallel. One is that when we as a public CA get approved BRs that allow these standards to be correct, then we will be able to start issuing certificates. But at the same time, I don't know for sure that your environments will be able to support these certificates at the same time that I'm able to start issuing them. So those are the two things that we'll have to see how the two of those shape up. What were you going to say, Nick?
No, I was just going to say, well, we've got the next slide that probably covers a bit more about what I was saying, but it is, it's interesting to know that we've got these steps that we've got to go through, because a lot of people do say, hey, can you issue me one of these certs now that NIST have FIPSified these new algorithms? And the answer is, I mean, technically, yes. Yeah. I think we certainly have this post-quantum sandbox we have, where we can issue something that is like a non-trusted certificate that uses these algorithms. But until the rest of those pieces that you described fall into place in the IETF, then the CAB forum, then the vendor support, until that happens, we can't really issue certificates, and you can't really use them until all those things fall into place. So it's kind of this waiting game that you said, Tim, and a balance between the vendors and the standards bodies to get to a state where we can actually issue publicly trusted post-quantum certificates, right, and they can be usable in your environment. But then, yes, there's also this question
let's talk about what you can have today. Yeah. So let's talk about what you can have today. We have what we call our PQC sandbox. And basically what this is if you come and you sign up with us, we have to approve it on a customer by customer basis. But it will give you the opportunity to get private root certificates with MLDSA that you can put in environments. Now, these won't be publicly trusted. They're not any good for production environments. But what they are good for is for you to start using them essentially to see what breaks, right? So you can start throwing them into environments that mirror the real things you really work in production, and ask yourself what is working, what is not. And it's a good way to start developing an inventory of what will need to be updated, which is a very important point. And the last point on the what happens now slide said, you should assume that everything you have will need to be updated. I think that's a fair assumption. Now, some of that stuff will be easy. And the classic example of that is the desktops that you give to your employees. They have either Windows or Mac OS on them. Microsoft and Apple are going to take care of that for you. They're just going to give you an update, and one day your desktops will be PQC enabled and they'll be fine. You don't have to do anything, right? But then on the other end of the spectrum, there'll be all kinds of software that we use inside of our enterprises where you're going to have to say, is this current? Is there a patch? Do I need to deploy the patch? Is this software still supported? What if it's not? Or is this a homegrown thing that we built ourselves? And you need to go through everything and understand what needs to change and what is involved in changing it. Because some of them will be trivial, but some of them will be quite difficult, I'm sure. And, ultimately, again, these are long projects. It takes a long time to prepare for this. So we are strongly advocating that you start now, if you haven't started already. Sign up for the PQC sandbox. If you just go to sectigo.com/ I think it's post-quantum-labs, I think. Maybe Leah, maybe you can tell us during Q&A. If you go sign up there, you can sign up and you can get those and start using them. And that's something that we recommend to do. So Nick, you were going to say, but what else is coming from NIST? So take it away.
Yes, yeah, that was the next
Nick,
thing
did I lose you? There you go.
and without going into
Yeah.
too much of the nitty-gritty details on this, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
without going into some of too much of the details on this, those new algorithms that NIST have all certified and specified, they're great. But one of the downsides to a lot of the post-quantum algorithms is they are unfortunately generating quite large signatures and or have quite large keys.
Yes.
And as a result,
Yes.
when it comes to things like TLS, that can be a little bit difficult. There's some testing and work and things have been going on with people like Google and Cloudflare, and it does pose a potential problem. So NIST are still looking at another round of candidate algorithms with great fun names, in the hope that there can be one that is found to be suitable and secure and is able to give us a bit more of a sweet spot between key size and signature size, so that it might be a little bit more practically deployable on the web, essentially, and on the public internet. Because with some of the keys that we have, the post-quantum ones, like we mentioned before, they're just a little bit too big, I think, to always practically work. And so new algorithms, and it's always good to have extra backups. Like you said, Tim, we already have one new one just this week. It's always good to have spares in case something comes along and gets broken or there found to be a flaw in it, because a lot of these haven't been researched as long as things like RSA and ECC.
Sure.
So it's always useful to have more options, say more eggs in the basket.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Like RSA has been in production locking up our greatest secrets since the 1970s. RSA has been very, very, very well investigated. And none of these other algorithms comes close to that in terms of the amount of scrutiny that has been placed on it. So even though we're looking at something like Lattice and all of the indicators today are that nobody knows how to break open a Lattice hard problem, that doesn't mean there isn't a way, right? And so NIST is very sensitive to this. And one of the things that, I think we should bear in mind is that we are moving into a new era in computing where cryptographic agility takes on a whole new level of importance. So we should not expect ever again in history for an IT professional to be able to work their entire career using a single basic cryptographic standard like RSA, right? The fact that RSA has been in use for 40 years is not something that we should plan on ever again. And we just need to know that, right? And we need to build our systems and our processes around that as an idea. That's point number one. And then point number two, like you said, Nick, every single one of these candidates, the ones that were accepted and the ones that weren't, performatively was worse than RSA and ECC both in at least one meaningful way. It could be signature size, it could be key size, it could be just, time. All of these, in all of these various ways, there's something that makes it not as good. And somewhere along the line, all of our systems, depending on that, will break, right? Because there are assumptions built in. And so all that's going to have to be dealt with. So for both these reasons, NIST has a couple more programs that are going on right now. And, we talked to Dr. Dustin Moody from NIST, who leads this initiative last year on the Root Causes podcast. And he told us just kind of expect this to be the new normal. That like from here on out, society, we always be looking at new potential candidate algorithms and how to transition. And this is just going to be what we do from here on out. So, that's how to think about it. And again, let's build our systems and our processes and our expectations accordingly. All right, next. Chrome's recent update to their root policy. All right, this is a one-slide thing, so we can just walk down it. So Chrome recently released their root policy 1.6. Nick, I think I captured everything here. If I missed something, just tell me. But these are probably the big ones. There's been a history of CAs using the same roots and the same root hierarchies for multiple purposes. So you'll have your TLS and your code signing and your SMIME all sitting on the same root hierarchy. You'll be issuing these different certificate types, but from a root perspective, it'll be identical. And this is something that Chrome has not only wants, but has dictated that public CAs need to get away from. And they're in the process of that transition right now. So new applicants, one of the things about new applicants is that they have to have a dedicated hierarchy, root hierarchy that's dedicated to TLS. Can't be used for anything else. Existing applicants, there's a timeline, or existing programs, there's a timeline where those roots will need to be phased out in place of root hierarchies that are TLS specific. Right, Nick?
Yes, yeah, I think you've captured all the main changes in this. I mean, just for everybody's kind of clarity and some context, this is the Chrome root source program. So this is living in a CAB forum baseline requirements. And Google are very good about updating this policy and adapting it to changes and having discussions on that. And these are some of the changes that just came out in the very recent version. I think one thing just to kind of highlight here specifically, which actually isn't on the slide, but is part of the first bullet point, is there is a particular feature of some server certificates called client authentication, which is going to be phased out in the middle of 2026. I know we're doing some communication soon. I think a couple of other CAs may even have already sent some communication out, but it is an important change. We may talk about it in the next one when things are a bit more clarified and we know a bit more about the impact to customers and subscribers. But the fact that this single purpose hierarchy means that for server certificates, the client key usage will be phased out over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. And for some subscribers and some customers, that may have some impact they need to look at. So there's a bunch of changes in there. These are the main ones, but I think client auth might be something that people do want to look at. And as I say, we'll be doing communication.
That's a very good point, Nick. And maybe we'll drill down on that in a future Pulse webinar. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think when we get some more clarity on how people are using it would be a good idea, because it's one of those things that we can't see from the outside in. And so we need to have kind of plenty of feedback from at least our customer base to understand how the impact is going to hit those people and what we can do about it.
I like that a lot. And then also, if you look at the other things in the new applicant requirements, it's a good way to see where Chrome sees the industry going, right? So all new root store applicants at this point must support automation. It's a hard requirement, or they will not be allowed to stay in the root store or be admitted to the root store. And there's a hard requirement coming where all existing roots will have to support automation. So this shows you the importance that Chrome places on automation, if that wasn't already clear. And then the last thing is it's come to light that there's some muddiness and confusion around the roles of a CP and a CPS, and that not all CAs view it the same, not all CAs treat it the same. And in general, there's a concern that this could make it very hard for relying parties and other interested bodies to understand what a CA actually does, right? Where do I look for one document versus another, and what if they're different, which one's authoritative, et cetera. And so Chrome is putting some clarity around how it expects that to work. Again, as a new applicant requirement, but we should expect that to become a requirement for all CAs, right? They'll need to give CAs a chance to transition on these things, which is why you see them as new applicant requirement first, but then ultimately they'll move on. And then they did some other things that I would categorize as more kind of cosmetic and not something to worry about, but they reorganized and stuff along those lines. All right.
Yep.
Updates to DCV. And I think there's two things to discuss here. There's MPIC, and then there's some versions of DCV that are being deprecated. So let's start with MPIC. We've talked about this before. This is called multi-perspective issuance corroboration. And what this is this is a strategy whereby when a CA is checking a DNS record or a website as part of its operations that it needs to check it from multiple places around the globe. And the reason for that is this defends against what we call a border gateway protocol attack, which is a way that somebody in a localized area can trick DNS servers into sending you to the wrong place. And that's a potential attack. It's real. It's something that does exist in the real world and needs to be defended against. And so there's a step up guideline, just like we talked about Apple's proposal kind of stepping down the certificate lifespan. This does the opposite. This steps up the level of MPIC coverage that you need to have over time. And the reason for that is just to give CAs an opportunity to make this increasingly heavy lift successful. So first you have to check 2 perspectives, then it moves to 3, then it moves to 4, right? And eventually you're going to have to be up to 7 locations in the next few years, and you're going to have, I think, at least all but 2 of them must correspond, something along those lines.
Yep.
So the important nearby dates that are interesting. The first one is that as of March 15, 2025, so just a few days ago, CAs are expected to have MPIC running in what we call logging mode. What this means is we're not acting. We don't have to act on what we learn, but we have to be running it and logging results. And this is the first stage in CAs phasing in. The idea here is that as we have technical errors and bugs and challenges we didn't anticipate, that we have some time to learn from them and fix them and get them rectified so that when the next date comes, which is September 15, 2025, on that date, we will have actual gated issuance, which means to say if we do an MPIC where we go out from multiple perspectives and they don't agree, you can't issue the cert, right? So, and that's the real purpose of it, is in that way we'll gate that to ensure that we're getting the correct address every time. That kicks in on September 15, 2025. Now that's for TLS. SMINE's on a slightly different timeline, but the monitoring deadline is May 15, 2025, and then September will be the same timeline for moving to actual issuance gating. So this is a very important change for the industry. Very important for people like Nick and me who have to do things in a very specific way to be compliant. I do not believe it affects you as a subscriber in terms of what you need to do. I think you do the same thing you did before, and all the change has to happen on our end. But this is a major change inside of the industry to a major foundational part of what we do as a CA, which is BCV. So it's very important. And if you're an industry follower, it's worth knowing about.
Yeah, I think one thing to say on that last point, Tim, you are right. We kind of hope that this isn't going to affect anybody. I think we have this 6-month period now between March and September where we can at least take stock of that logging and use that to identify if there are any customer problems, because obviously we'll be able to see if MPIC would have failed and why it would have failed. I do suspect there'll be some edge cases out there. If you're an organization that orders certificates, and when you do domain validation or when you have CAA checks performed, if you do something a little bit different, like only allow DNS queries from a particular country or a particular location, that may prove to be problematic. And your CA will probably be reaching out to you to talk about that and see if they can help you to kind of not do that, because that kind of defeats the point of MPIC. But hopefully, I'd say 99% of people are going to remain unimpacted here, and it's just going to give us all a better security by doing these checks, as you say, to kind of prevent against BGP hijacks. Yeah.
All right. So the next one is that who is. So there was a good amount of fanfare last year when it became when it was announced, release, that the .mobi domain had been taken over by a white hat researcher using a whois-based spoof attack. And coming out of that, there was a lot of discussion of this, and the basic thing that resulted is the CA industry, I would say, finally got around to deprecating some methods that I think we all were pretty leery of and have been for a long time. I think you probably would agree with that, Nick.
Yes.
And so what's happening is, as of January 15, 2025, some limits have gone into place to specify and limit how CAs can use domain contact information they get from WHOIS or RGAP, right? So that and that's because this information is just potentially wrong. It's potentially spoofable, and so you have to use it in a very specific way to at least mitigate that threat. But that ultimately doesn't solve it. So the more interesting date is June 15, 2025, where two sets of DCV methods are just plain deprecated, not allowed anymore. So the old email, fax, SMS, or mail to the main contact, I don't think any of us, I hope nobody actually sends physical letters to domain contacts anymore, but you're allowed to. And that's being deprecated. You'll not be allowed to anymore. And likewise, phone calls, just same as emails to domain contacts, are also going to be taken out. These are not methods that are secure. They're spoofable. They're fundamentally not safe. They're also not scalable. They're also completely out of alignment with shortening DCV reuse periods and shortening certificate lifespans. And so when you put all of those things together, there is no real value. And there is a genuine risk. So these are deprecated as of June 15. If you are relying on these methods in any way, better stop. Because as of June 15, your CA will not be allowed to do that. And then the other thing connected to that is there will not be any, after June 15, there will not be any data reuse for DCV that use those methods, regardless of how much time would have been left in the data reuse period otherwise. So that's the change that's coming in June 15, 2025.
And I think that lines up as well, Tim, with what we talked about before with the shortening lifetime and the reduction in DCV. I think if anybody really is doing, postal mail-based domain verification, as crazy as that sounds, having to do one of those every 10 days is probably very impractical, even in the best case.
It's probably impractical. And even a phone call is not going to work.
I agree. It's not going to work. And so basically we're moving away from methods that are either, generally considered weak, something that isn't properly based on a technical method like a DNS check, but also something that's not really automatable. I appreciate in some cases people can automate receiving an email and following the link and things like that. But the reality is, with that event that you talked about and the security issue, using WHOIS-based DCV is at least certainly something that needs to be phased out and is being doing. But I do think I'll add that if anybody out there is still using regular email DCV very heavily, that is to like an admin, administrator, hostmaster, webmaster contact, maybe start rethinking that in light of short lifetime, in light of the general kind of trends, I would say, from Google and Mozilla and Apple to want to deprecate those methods of email in general. There's no date, there's no official discussion on that yet. It's more of a kind of a feeling, but those methods or any methods relying on things like email are probably likely to go away in the future, and certainly are much more challenging at a more frequent reuse pace. So start to think about how you could do DCV with DNS is a solid piece of advice I'll give.
Yeah. And if nothing else, think about it this way. So MPIC isn't a solution for an email-based DCV. So hypothetically, if someone were to BGP you in the right way and redirect the email, rather than the robot from the CA that's looking for the shared secret, then that doesn't get solved by MPIC. So that's a problem. Right? Yep. So that either needs to be solved by something that would be the email equivalent of MPIC, right? What would that be? We send 7 emails from different part of the globe, and you have to reply to at least 5 of them correctly. Right? Like, that's awful. So it would have to be solved by something akin to that, or it has to go away, one of the two. So don't count on email in the long term, because the same the same BGP problem applies to it as well.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to start to think about better, easier, more automatable, and stronger methods. And hopefully, the change in lifetimes will persuade people to start looking more seriously at that as well. Yep.
Yep. All right. As always, I like to do a shameless plug. So if you like this conversation, I am co-host of the Root Causes podcast, which dives deep into matters of digital certificates, PKI, stuff like we talked about today, and much more. We have great quality guests. I referenced a couple of them on this alone. And it's just a great place to stay current on what's going on in the world of PKI. We're publishing new episodes every week. We are coming up on our 500th episode. So come join us on Root Causes for sure. And with that, I think we're ready for questions. Leah, do we have any questions?
We do indeed. Give me a second. So the first question that's come in is, do we know when Apple will complete the voting for the 47-day ballot?
Oh, no. So Apple, so how it works with a CAB form ballot is whoever brings the ballot out kind of controls the timing. They can put the ballot into what we call a discussion period. They can keep it in the discussion period for as long as they want. It must be at least 7 days, but it can be longer. And then when they want to, they can take it to a vote. And then voting goes for 7 days. And so Apple originally proposed this a long time ago as a ballot. Now, as I mentioned, it's updated it a few times, and every time that Apple updates the ballot, they have a minimum 7-day discussion period they have to restart. We are currently done with that minimum period for the current draft of the ballot. So if Apple doesn't make any more changes, it can go to vote anytime it likes. Now, that said, we have a CA Browser Forum face-to-face meeting next week, and I'm certain this will be a discussion at the meeting, among other things, because it's an agenda topic. And so I can't imagine Apple going to a vote until after the face-to-face. And then at that point, who's to say? They may feel that the ballot is right in its current form and may go to a vote. They may want to make other adjustments based on the face-to-face and then have to restart the period. It's hard to say. If I were predicting, I would predict that we are in vote this in the month of April, that it goes to vote in April, and that we see what happens. But I don't know that for sure. What do you think, Nick?
Well, I think you've put it exactly right there, Tim. It's there's a proper process to these ballots, and the control is somewhat within Apple. As you say, we have a meeting very soon. I do think we can expect to see it soon. I mean, as we said before, this is the most meaningful step towards getting these final dates and everything, finally codified that we've seen in the past couple of years. So I am hopeful that it'll go to ballot very soon. And as I said, I hope we get a positive outcome, and the CAs come together and agree that this is a good thing, and that we do want to agree to these proposed Apple timelines and get it passed, and then we can start getting everybody towards the goal.
Yeah.
Great. And we have a great follow-up question there. What will happen if the ballot passes? Also, what will happen if it fails?
Yes, that's the interesting question.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if it passes, then we will end up. There will be, the effective dates as per the timeline that's proposed. I don't think at this stage we'll see any changes. They've been changed a few times, so we'll end up with the timeline we've got. It'll be something that's adapted into the baseline requirements, the CAB forum, so it'll be something that all CAs will have to adhere to, and it'll just become a rule, and we'll have to follow it, and all of our subscribers will too. I think what happens if it doesn't pass is a little bit more. Well, it's a little bit unclear, quite honestly. Tim and I have both said before, and I've certainly said, what we've seen historically with the browsers is that they will ballot something like this that they feel is good. If it fails in the CAB forum, they still do have the right and the ability to make it a part of their root program requirements. Okay, so if this ballot fails, Apple, or indeed Google, or Mozilla, or Microsoft, or any number of those, they could choose to take the dates and the timelines and put them into their root program requirements. Now, whether Apple or Google or anyone will do this is not really that clear. Google did seem to suggest in their moving forward together policy that they might be open to doing that.
Right.
There's some language in there that suggests that's something they would consider. But we don't know, quite honestly. I would like to think that at least both Apple and Google would want all of the industry to come together and to agree and to have this pass. As Tim said right at the start, there's been a lot of discussion, I think a lot of constructive discussion, although perhaps at this point it is running on a little bit too far. But there needs to be a consensus. I think everybody can agree it's a good thing, even if it's perhaps not something that some areas and some people don't like. But I believe that Apple and Google would like us to all agree to this, get it passed, and then all work together to the timelines. I don't think they particularly want to enforce it through a root program policy, even though they do have the ability to do that. So we'll just have to wait and see till the ballot comes, goes, and what happens as a result of the outcome.
Great. Then on a different topic, will the new DCV validations accept bulk validations for public domains?
Did you say bulk validations like BULK there?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can still do. I mean, bulk validation is still a thing. It's not really something that is kind of required or not required by the guidelines. It's really just your CA being able to perform a lot of validations at the same time. And there are several ways to do that in various CAs and various platforms. So there's no reason that bulk validation can't work. I think what perhaps the question is looking at is with the whois option, you as a domain owner could place the same email address on multiple domains. So you could I could have my email address on nickfrance.com and nickfrance.org and nickfrance.uk, and you could have all of those go to the same email address, which means you can validate multiple domains with a single email. Obviously, without whois, that's not necessarily practical. Not possible in some cases, but there are things you can do. So there is the possibility to set up a mailbox that receives, say, admin at any domain you control, and that all goes into a single mailbox. You might receive multiple emails, but it will still go into the same place. There is also a domain validation method that does still use email, where an email address can be scraped, if you like, or obtained from the DNS CAA record. Some CAs support that, some do. And if you can place an email address, a singular email address in the CAA record, and that record is the same across multiple domains, you could feasibly use one email to validate multiple domains. But I think the thing to bear in mind is what I just said earlier about the domain verification, which is we would strongly recommend that anybody still using email for validation start to look at better and more automatable methods, because I don't expect email is going to be around forever, and it's certainly not the easiest method to use when it comes to domain validation.
Yeah, especially with many more domain validations happening.
Exactly. Yep.
Great, and that was all the questions that have come in. Tim, you earlier mentioned about the PQC labs. I have put that link into the chat. So is sectigo.com/quantum-labs if anyone wants to check that out. If you've got any more questions afterwards, please feel free to get in touch with the Sectigo team, either via our website or social media. But yeah, thank you everyone for your time, and thank you, Nick and Tim, and have a good rest of your day.